Welcome to This Explainer. Look, we're going to dive right into this today because we're unpacking something that literally affects every single one of us, even though it usually happens entirely behind closed doors. We are opening up the mathematical rulebook of the U.S. tax code. Now, hang on, I know the word taxes might make some of you want to run for the hills, but stick with me here. We are not here to point fingers or make moral judgments. Instead, we're going to look at this system for exactly what it is. It's an intricate, highly engineered game with very specific rules. And when you understand the mechanics of how this game is played, it completely changes how you view wealth, corporations, and the funding of our entire society. So let's get into it.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with A, two-tiered tax system, then we'll get into buy, borrow, die explained. After that, industry havens and loopholes, followed by the zero-tax corporate landscape. Finally, we'll wrap up with projecting new tax revenues and reinvesting in public infrastructure. All right, let's go.
Section 1. A two-tiered tax system.
Okay, so this is the foundational premise we've absolutely got to understand before we look at anything else. Basically, there is a massive structural divide in how different types of money are treated. For the vast majority of us, right, everyday wage-earning citizens, the federal income tax system is compulsory. It's transaction-based. You earn a paycheck, and a portion is automatically captured by the government. Sometimes at ordinary rates up to 37%, bam, automatic. But when you look at the very upper limits of the wealth distribution, the tax code behaves completely differently. Because ultra-wealthy individuals usually get their wealth from assets growing in value, not from a traditional paycheck, they are legally insulated from ordinary income tax liabilities. So you might think, well, they pay millions in taxes. And sure, but if you look at their true tax rate, meaning the taxes they pay relative to how much their overall wealth actually grew, it is incredibly low. To put this in perspective, between 2014 and 2018, the top 25 wealthiest Americans saw their wealth grow by over $400 billion. But their effective true tax rate relative to those gains, it was roughly 3.4%. Yep, 3.4%.
And the long-term result of that structural divide is, well, it's mathematical compounding. Check this out. Over periods stretching from 1982 all the way to 2025, the wealth of the ultra-rich has expanded 5 percentage points faster per year than the rest of the broader economy. Now, 5% might not sound like a huge deal on paper, but over 4 decades, that compounding growth is like a giant snowball rolling down a hill. It turns millions into billions and billions into trillions, all of it expanding so much faster than the everyday economy the rest of us actually live in.
Moving on to Section 2, buy, borrow, die explained.
So let's see how this actually builds into a specific strategy. This is a genuinely brilliant legal framework that the ultra-wealthy use to fund their everyday lifestyles without ever triggering an income tax. It's an engineering pathway, really. Here is exactly how the mechanics work step by step. Step 1, buy and hold. Founders like Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Page, they famously set their official salaries at exactly $1 a year. They take their actual compensation in company stock. As the company grows, their wealth skyrockets, but because it's not a paycheck, it's not taxed. Boom. Then, step 2, borrow. You might be wondering, how do they buy the mansions and the yachts with a $1 salary? Well, they use their massive stock holdings as collateral to take out low-interest loans from major banks. And since IRS rules explicitly dictate that borrowed money isn't income, it is entirely tax-free cash. Finally, step 3, die. When a billionaire passes away, a rule called the stepped-up basis resets the value of all those assets to their current market price. This legally erases decades of capital gains taxes for their heirs. It's literally that systematic. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is the math behind step 2. Imagine you need $3 million in cash and you've got a $5 million portfolio. Option A is to liquidate, right? You sell the stock. But that triggers over $571,000 in capital gains taxes. Ouch. Option B is to use leverage. You take a loan against the stock. That triggers exactly $0 in tax. Zero. When you look at it purely as a math equation, the choice is pretty obvious, isn't it? Why would any rational financial engineer choose option A? By going with option B, you get the cash, you legally owe absolutely nothing in taxes, and your $5 million portfolio stays in the market, continuing to grow. So what makes this all legal? The foundational rule that makes this entire framework possible is called the realization principle. This actually stems from a 1920 Supreme Court decision. Think of it kind of like owning a home. If your house's value goes up by $50,000 this year, you don't pay income tax on that 50 grand until you actually sell the house, right? The rule simply states that a stock or asset going up in value is not classified as taxable income until a transaction, like a sale, actually occurs. That single legal definition from over a century ago, that is the absolute linchpin of modern billionaire wealth shielding.
All right, Section 3, industry havens and loopholes.
Now that we understand the individual mechanics, let's broaden our view. We're going to look at how specific industries and major political figures utilize specialized, highly effective tax maneuvers. And hey, it's really important to note here that playing this game well is completely bipartisan. The rulebook genuinely doesn't care what side of the aisle you sit on. For instance, Democratic Governor Jared Polis legally paid $0 in federal income taxes for multiple years by utilizing paper losses and foundation deductions. Over on the Republican side, we have figures like Senator Rick Scott and former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos using specialized trusts called GRATs. These essentially act as a legal vault, allowing assets to be passed to heirs without triggering massive estate taxes. And again, no one is breaking the law here. Absolutely not. They are simply employing elite accountants to maximize the legal rulebook that's been provided to them. Outside of politics, billionaires deploy these specialized maneuvers across all kinds of different sectors. Have you ever wondered why billionaires just love buying sports teams? Well, it's because under the law, an owner like Steve Ballmer can write off nearly the entire purchase price of the LA Clippers against his other income through a process called amortization. Or consider Peter Thiel. He famously stuffed early startup shares into a Roth IRA. Now that's a vehicle meant for middle-class retirement, but he legally grew it to over $5 billion, totally tax-free. No way, right? But it's true. Then you have real estate developers claiming massive depreciation losses on buildings that are actually going up in value. Or collectors shuffling fine art into tax-free Freeport warehouses so they can get inflated appraisals for huge write-offs. The sheer creativity in applying these legal shields is, honestly, it's truly remarkable. Which brings us to Section 4, the zero-tax corporate landscape. Let's expand our scope from individuals to mega corporations, because here, there's a fascinating divergence between the book income a company brags about to its shareholders and the taxable income it reports to the IRS. Book income shows how profitable they are to investors, right? But taxable income is carefully, legally adjusted down using deductions to lower their actual tax bill. In 2025, an analysis revealed that 88 of the largest, highly profitable U.S. corporations paid an effective federal income tax rate of exactly 0%. Yep, zero. For example, Tesla and United Airlines generated billions in pre-tax income, but effectively wiped out their tax liabilities using legal deductions like accelerated depreciation and R&D expensing. Amazon generated over $54 billion, but reported a tax rate of just 1.37% by legally deducting things like executive stock options. It's perfectly legal and perfectly engineered. And this brings us to a really profound structural paradox. While these massive entities use advanced strategies to minimize their tax contributions, they simultaneously receive an estimated $181 billion annually in federal corporate welfare. We're talking direct grants, subsidies, and loan guarantees to private businesses. Now compare that $181 billion to just $11 billion spent on aid to families with dependent children. Let that sink in for a second. It's a striking look at how our system actually allocates its resources when you peek under the hood. To show exactly how public taxpayer funds can get injected straight into private corporate profit margins, let's just look at federal procurement. A recent audit found that a defense contractor named Transdigm charged the Pentagon over $1,400 for a tiny 3-inch clutch disc, a disc that cost only $32 to produce. That is an inflated profit margin of over 4,400%, paid directly out of the public treasury right into corporate balance sheets. It's just astonishing when you see the actual mechanics at play. All right, Section 5, projecting new tax revenues. So we've explored the rules of the game as they exist today. But what happens if we decide to change the rules? Economists have run the numbers on this, and the sheer scale of the financial power here is mind-boggling. If policymakers simply tweaked the code to include a 2% annual tax on household net worth over $50 million, an adjustment that, by the way, would only apply to the top 0.15% of families, it's projected to generate $514 billion in just its first year. Similarly, raising the statutory corporate tax rate back up to 28% would generate an estimated $135 billion annually. We are talking about unlocking literally trillions of dollars over a 10-year window, just by adjusting a few lines of code in the rulebook. Finally, Section 6, reinvesting in public infrastructure. When you suddenly have access to hundreds of billions in newly projected revenues, previously unsolvable societal costs just become simple math equations. Take the issue of hunger.
Every single year, 47 million Americans experience food insecurity. Now, Feeding America calculates the national food budget shortfall, which is the exact amount of money needed to meet basic nutritional requirements for every hungry person in the country. That number is roughly $32 billion. A fraction, just a tiny fraction, of the revenue from a progressive wealth tax could entirely, completely eradicate the shortfall.
Or consider chronic homelessness. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has historically estimated that providing permanent supportive housing, mental health treatment, and financial assistance to effectively end chronic homelessness in the United States would cost about $20 billion annually. Again, this is just a fraction of those newly projected revenues. It's totally within reach when the math changes. To put this into an even broader perspective for you, let's talk about childcare. Establishing a nationwide network of high-quality, universal childcare and early learning centers serving 12 million children, independent economic analysis projects that would cost about $70 billion a year. That means you could fully fund universal childcare for the entire nation using just 11% of the revenue generated by a 2% ultramillionaire tax. Just 11% for the whole shebang. So, if society actually chooses to structurally rebalance the system, how do we fix these engineering pathways we've been talking about? Well, policy recommendations act kind of like a toolkit. Enacting an annual wealth tax captures that massive asset growth. Taxing collateralized loans, that treats borrowing against those assets as a realization event, closing that loophole. Repealing the stepped-up basis rule prevents massive fortunes from passing completely untaxed between generations. And finally, raising corporate profit taxes and reallocating that corporate welfare allows public funds to shift right back toward public infrastructure where it's needed most. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this thought. The system we have today isn't an accident, and it definitely isn't a force of nature. It's a man-made architecture, and it is functioning exactly as it is currently designed. The ultra-wealthy are simply playing the game by the rules they've been given, but the rules can be rewritten. So the ultimate question isn't whether the current system is mathematically flawless, it's whether it's the system we actually want. If the tax code is just a set of rules, what kind of game do we want to play? Thanks so much for joining me to explore these mechanics together, and I'll see you next time.